we're at risk, the banking system presumes to impose interest upon our promissory obligations, which are to pay and to only to pay and to retire principal from circulation. Now, an important side point to this is, been raised in discussions I've had recently with Pawn Man, David Hall, who is Pawn Man. We've David's contested this as well with a bank in Hong Kong, I believe it is. And he's brought up the fact that when he contracted, he was misled to understand that this was the property of the bank, and that which might justify interest. And this is the thing that's so important for us to understand. Then you can't understand this from saying, we're victims of a Ponzi scheme, or money is created out of thin air. We have to understand this obfuscation of the currency. So we have a crime which is committed against us, which first presumes these debts are to the banking system, launders the principal into their possession as we pay it, and in turn, only as if the principal were the rightful possession of a banking system which gives up no lawful consideration and therefore creates no debt to itself. But yet as if this were property of the bank, they subject it to interest, which, as I've explained, through this obfuscation of our currency, multiplies falsified indebtedness to a banking system, as we are forced to maintain a vital circulation by perpetually borrowing interest and principal that we pay out of circulation and servicing this falsified indebtedness. We have to borrow it back into circulation as new debts, with the principal that we borrow back into circulation comprising new debt equal to the old, making it mathematically impossible to pay down any prior sum of debt, and with the interest that we pay out of circulation and borrow back then being new debt, thus increasing the sum of debt by so much as periodic interest on an ever greater sum of debt, until, at an inherently escalating rate, we reach a terminal sum of debt, which is embodied in the events everywhere around us. So this is why these questions to this Bank of England are so important, because they relate to the crime, the nature of the crime. We can't expect the criminal to confess the crime, although there will be times and cases where indeed that happens. I've had international bankers, as early as 1980 and even before, confess that indeed I was right. So not only that there's an obfuscation of the currency that is unwarranted and unjustifiable, but that it is terminal, which isn't something that they understood before necessarily, but may have sensed, and my work is a proof that this obfuscation is terminal and that it has one and one only solution, and furthermore that there is one and one only just means of transforming any system of this involuntary servitude imposed upon us through a vehicle of an obfuscated currency. So mathematically perfected economy has long been a proof of singular solution. Now, of course, these issues aren't solved entirely by merely spending money into circulation. So this is another preposterous notion that 11th hour pretenders and imitators have come up with, because my work is copyright and trademarked. So they want to claim, they all have products to sell. They're charging you money to hear, their version of what I'm giving you for free correctly, and they are giving you watered down, piecemeal, incorrectly, without solution. In fact, diverting your own focus from solution, or a fact of singular solution, which of course long preceded them by many years. So our four questions again were: what lawful consideration do you claim the Bank of England gives up when it creates money? 2, how then does the bank claim there is a debt to the bank? That's a yes or no question. Does the bank claim there is a debt to the bank? I mean, is this unintelligible or unfocused? The Bank of England, as we've already heard, has asserted that it did. It is, and we replied, indeed ad nauseum, but covering all the facts which relate to the fact that it is highly focused and that these are, highly relevant questions. In fact, these are the central focus of the issues at hand. The huge crimes against us that are dispossessing people across the world have been doing this for ever since the first days of the system, but at an escalating rate, which is precipitating in terminal dispossession today. So we, the people of the world, have no further time to dilly-dally around. We must understand this obfuscation and its consequences, its fact of singular solution, in an eradication of interest and an obligatory schedule of payment, which perpetually maintain a one-to-one relationship between remaining circulation, remaining value of represented property, and remaining obligation to pay just that much for that property, or to redeem just so much property in just that much circulation. So there is no further aspect even to contend with, and indeed all these things are perfectly contended with if and only if we eradicate interest, which is unjustifiable under this obfuscation of the circulation, and if we impose this obligatory schedule of payment. So mathematically perfected economy is that simple. You can't pretend that it's hidden away somewhere. I repeat it in every program several times often. Its definition of it exists on every page that has been online for 20 years. There's no hiding from this. So our third question was, what is the claim to interest then, when the bank can do no more than absorb the costs of merely publishing evidence of our promissory obligations to each other? Not relevant? It points right at solution. Not focused? How could you have more focused questions than these? Our fourth is, how is it possible even to maintain a vital circulation without accumulating inevitably terminal sums of debt? Now, if there was a question which is difficult to understand, it would be the latter, because in order to answer it, you would have to understand the ramifications of this obfuscation, which of course are everywhere around us. There's no evidence that doesn't concur with this fact of terminal exploitation that we've been subjected to, which has been, as I have said, for 43 years, imposed upon us. Why do I say imposed upon us? Because it has been imposed upon us by governments which have an obligation to serve us, not criminals who are exploiting us by a terminal means of exploitation, no less. The responsibility of every government in the world is to serve its people alike, unless it is an unjust government. And everywhere around us we have unjust government, because every government in the world is in breach of this principle of common rights. That is, rights that are equal for each and every one of us. So this is what's paved the way for world deterioration of every kind. This imposition of this obfuscation of our currency in conjunction with usurpation of every government in the world to serve exploitation. To serve exploitation of we the people, of you and of I. So I've covered the prior responses of the Bank of England in previous programs. So I'm just going to read the most recent PDF here, which is dated. There's actually two versions of it posted. I'm not sure that both of them are the same. One is dated July 25th. The other is dated July 26th. In response to our July 6th response. So 19 or 20 days have elapsed. Both of the files have the same reported file size online, so I'm assuming that they're both the same response. And so this is again addressed from a Mr. Ben Norman, Deputy Secretary of the Bank of England. Gives his telephone and fax numbers and email address, ben.norman@bankofengland.co.uk. Dear Mark Lee of the Giles family, please Mark has, submitted this request as a resident of the UK. He's way south of London himself here. Dear Mark Lee of the Giles family, please may I begin by pointing out that your email dated 6th of July is over 4,500 words long. Well, the bank, Mr. Norman in particular, in his previous response had asserted that our questions were unfocused, that we were debating philosophy, that the questions weren't relevant, that they didn't ask for written material. Well, the fact of the matter is, other questions which are being answered to some extent, likewise evasively, by the Bank of England, they don't ask explicitly for written material. So we weren't about to revise our questions. We just clarified that they were indeed for written material because he was attempting to avoid having to answer. So, yes, there's 4,500 words, and poor Mr. Norman, he had to read them. No, he didn't even read them. The letter was even constructed so that you would only have to read its very topmost parts and answer yes or no. Do you or do you not give up lawful consideration? We made it as simple can be. The rest of it, if he still contended that our questions were unfocused, explained our arguments that they were. So he asked for that material, and it was provided to him, and he likely never even read it. Now he's complaining, he's citing it as a reason for not replying. Furthermore, he says, where you now ask questions citing the Freedom of Information Act of 2000, you have in essence revised your original questions by adding to them a request for, quote, recorded information, unquote, as he requested. But he's going to complain about that now. Neither these revisions to your questions nor your thousands of extra words which answer to the assertions that he made, have served to make your assertions any more intelligible, your questions rather, any more intelligible than before. In my 4th of July letter to you, I drew to your attention the whatdotheyknow.com advice about keeping freedom of